Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on ITIL 4 for project managers. My name is Chad. I'm a member of the team here at Beyond20. I do have Erika with me, of course, and it is our pleasure to facilitate today's event. Just a couple quick housekeeping items. One, everyone is going to be muted throughout the presentation, but if you do have any questions at any point, definitely drop them into the chat box and we'll answer as many of them as possible at the end of our time. Also, be on the lookout for an email this afternoon with a recording of this webinar along with a discount code and additional ITIL resources just for you. So if you're not familiar with what we do at Beyond20, Beyond20 really trains and empowers clients to develop their own framework for improvement and innovation in their businesses. This is with an emphasis on people and processes and on technology. So we offer a wide range of training and consulting services as well as technology implementations to kind of support your digital transformation. So if there's anything we can help you with, definitely let us know. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Erika Flora. She is a project management genius. She is the CEO and founder of Beyond20, and she is also a lead editor and author of the official ITIL 4 Leader digital and IT strategy publication. So this should be a great time. Hi, Erika.
Hi there. Thanks for the intro, Chad. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so to add a little bit of context to what Chad is saying and tell you a little bit about me and who I am for those of you on the call that you've never met me. I actually got into IT completely by accident. My master's degree is actually in microbiology. And I worked as a microbiology for a couple of years and realized very quickly I don't like this very much. And through some happy accidents, I ended up working as a project and then a program manager for a few different organizations. And in one of my first jobs as a project manager, I got the opportunity to lead the organization through a transformation. So I guess I accidentally was doing transformations before transformations were cool, or that was a buzzword. And as part of that, I got an opportunity to lead a big software initiative. Absolutely loved it, had so much fun with it, and that kind of got me sucked into IT, as I like to say. And one of the times that I was working in IT, I got the opportunity to lead a big initiative, a metrics initiative in our organization to help give some visibility into the organization. And someone on my team said, we've heard about this thing called ITIL. We have no idea what it is, but you go take a class, you come back and you tell the rest of us and see if it's something that's valuable. And having had a background in project management, and seeing that there's value in having some good lightweight processes in place that can actually help you go faster. Back in my day when it was ITIL version 2, and we'll talk about kind of where it all came from, it was very process focused. And so having the background that I did, I was like, oh, this is awesome. And I got the opportunity to get quite a number of certifications in ITIL. I was service manager certified back when it was version 2, then became expert certified in version 3, and I'm now ITIL MP and SL, which stands for Managing Professional and Strategic Leader. So I've got all the letters behind my name, but I've also had the really good fortune of being able to put a lot of this into practice. In organizations and in coaching executives. And yeah, I was tapped to serve as the lead editor and one of the authors for the latest ITIL 4 core book called Digital and IT Strategy. So that's been a super fun adventure. It actually just was released on Amazon, I think last week. So if you've got like $100 rattling around in your pocket and you want to buy a book, It's a good one. So yeah, so that's a little bit about me and kind of how I came to all of this stuff. So I figured we'd just jump in and talk about where ITIL came from. And I'm going to draw a little bit on these slides so you can kind of see where I am on the slides. But it actually came to be back in the 80s. Back here, when the British government, their IT department was really struggling in being able to serve their customers. And what was kind of brilliant about the struggle was the government said, well, surely somebody in the world has IT figured out. Let's just go and ask them. And so they did essentially the largest collection of lessons learned that's ever been done in the tech community around how to run an IT organization, how to serve your customers, and came back with several volumes of information. And then what was kind of neat about it is because it was done by the government, it became public knowledge. And companies started looking at it and saying, oh gosh, this is the stuff we struggle with too. How do we serve our customers? How do we keep control of our assets? How do we work quickly and efficiently and effectively and all this kind of stuff? And so the British government said, we now have intellectual property that we can frankly make a bunch of money off of. Let's go and do that. And so they published the first set of books in the late 80s. That was essentially version 1. And then over time, the books have been really expanded upon and revised depending on kind of where the state of IT and where the state of technology is. And so around 2001, ITIL version 2 came out. That's when I first got certified. And then a few years later in 2007, ITIL version 3 came out. So most folks, if you've been certified in ITIL, you're probably certified in version 3. So between 2007 and really up until about 2019, most folks got certified in some flavor of ITIL version 3. So you probably talked about this thing called the service life cycle, so that products and services essentially go through a life cycle. So they start with strategy, understanding how it fits into our strategy. Then there's some element of design. Then there's some element of transitioning that to operation. And then there's throughout that, there's some element of continually improving upon that service. So that was like the big idea that came out of version 3. There have since been updates to version 3. So there were some additional processes that were added in 2011 that really helped organizations better align with their customers. So there was a process called business relationship management that came out, as well as a few others. In 2016, there was another book called ITIL Practitioner, which some folks on this call may know about. It's only a select few people know that it exists, but this whole idea of guiding principles came out. So if you're familiar with like the Agile Manifesto, or some lean principles, or some of the philosophies behind DevOps, the 3 ways of DevOps. The guiding principles pull a lot of ideas and thoughts and inspiration from a lot of these other things. And what I really liked about the guiding principles that came out is it really spoke to mindset. You know, what should our mindset be before we jump in and start implementing at the time, you know, practices, how we want to work. We need to think about, you know, what kinds of values drive the right behaviors. So that came out in 2016, and then those were put into and actually are now kind of weaved throughout ITIL 4. And so ITIL 4, the design of it started in 2018. ITIL Foundation was released in February of 2019, and then the intermediate classes have kind of been released every few months ever since then, the latest being the Digital and IT Strategy book, which was just released here earlier this month. The other thing I did here was I added, here, let me get rid of these drawings here if I can do that. Oh, sweet. Okay. So right around the same time that all of this stuff with ITIL was going on, the PMP certification was actually launched in 1984. So it's been around for a long time, and it's based on actually the PMBOK guide, the Project Management Body of Knowledge guide, was actually published after the PMP was launched. It was actually all started with a white paper back in the day. And then every 5 years or so, the PMBOK guide has been updated. We're now in the 6th edition. The 7th edition is going to be coming out early next year. But really similar paths in terms of timing and how they've been revised and things like that. So I want to jump in and talk about a couple of concepts that are brand new in ITIL 4. So if you've been trained in a previous version, these are going to be new things for really all of us. And the first big concept that comes out of ITIL 4 is this idea that us as an organization, we are a system. And ITIL talks about this thing called a service value system, meaning we can make improvements in small things, let's say in individual departments, improvements in a particular project or even a program, but we have to think about the wider impact to our entire organization. In fact, we have a customer that actually does software development, and they made huge strides in their software development teams and started using Scrum and getting really, really fast. What actually happened, and they didn't realize until they went through it, is that when one team or several teams in an organization improve, you can actually slow down the entire system, because you're kicking off, in this case, they were kicking out code, they were kicking out new software, and marketing wasn't ready for it, sales wasn't ready for it, and all these other teams got this huge amount of work that they didn't know how to handle, and it really slowed down the whole system. So that's really what this concept is saying to us, that opportunity and demand is going to present itself to us as an organization, and the really great organizations are the ones that get over to the right and create value the fastest. And so some of the elements in that service value system that impact how well or how not so well that system works are things like the guiding principles. You know, what is our culture like? What are the things that we value? How do we govern ourselves? And we can make mistakes in one of two ways. We can swing the pendulum essentially to having so much governance that we create a lot of bureaucracy and slow down the system. We can also swing the pendulum to the opposite side where, and I've had customers say this, like, we're agile, therefore it means we have no rules, we don't have to document anything, and that is not the case. But I've seen organizations where they strip out all governance and you end up with a different kind of pain and suffering. And so it's about finding that balance in governance. The service value chain we'll talk about next, but this is essentially how work gets done. Practices. So in version 3, those of you that are familiar and have been through like a foundations class or some advanced classes in ITIL version 3, everything used to be called a process. Now everything is actually called a practice. And the reason for that is because if you think about like a legal practice or a medical practice, it's more than just a process, right? They've got people, they've got buildings they have to pay rent on potentially. They've got several different processes within there. And so it's really, truly more of a practice, developing the practices in our organization rather than an individual process. So how we function as an organization comes down to, one of the elements is that of practices. And then the best organizations out there really have this culture of continual improvement. And I like to use the example of Amazon. They are obsessed with improving and with creating value for customers. They are excellent at executing. How do we get products and services into the hands of our customers quickly and of high quality that excite and delight them? Now, one of the kind of tie-ins to project management, if you think about what a project fundamentally is, a project has a finite start, it has a finite end, and it's almost like a microcosm of this bigger system. So as project managers, we have to kind of widen our perspective and expand our thinking beyond just the start and the end of a project. So we have to think about the overall, how we work with other teams, how this helps and furthers our vision as an organization, and how it brings value to our customers. The closest concept in project management that I've seen is that of benefits realization management, and at least the way that I interpret it, and I've seen it in just environments of our own as well as our customers, is that you can have a project that's on time and on budget and adheres exactly to scope. And if your customers don't love it, if it doesn't bring them value, then who cares? Nobody's ever going to look back at a project and say, well, at least that garbage product that we created was on time and we didn't spend a penny more than we expected, right? It's about value. If it doesn't bring value, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. So we also have to kind of change our thinking of how we look at projects. Yes, do we care about things being on time? Certainly. We don't want to make promises that we can't keep. Same with budget. We don't want to say, yeah, it's going to be $1, and it turns out that it's this never-ending well that we dumped money into. But we also have to look at, does this further the mission of our organization? Does this bring value to our customers? Okay, the other concept that I mentioned as part of the previous slide is that of the service value chain. For those of you, again, that are familiar with version 3, you probably remember that life cycle that talked about strategy and design and transition, service operation, and continual service improvement. This concept has replaced that for a couple of reasons. The main reason being that one of the unintended consequences of the service life cycle was that some organizations said, cool, this is how we're going to divide up our organization, and we're going to create all these cool new silos. We'll have a silo of people that just do strategy. We'll have a silo of people that just do design, et cetera, et cetera. And that was not the intent of the authors. That actually work gets done iteratively and incrementally a lot of times. So it doesn't happen sequentially. It doesn't say, okay, we first, do all this stuff in strategy, and then once our strategy is perfect, then we can eventually get into design. It's kind of that waterfall, if you're familiar with the waterfall way of working, that you do the one thing first, get it perfect, then you do the second thing next, do that perfectly. And that's not how things work in the real life. We have to think about how work gets delivered so that we bring value. Again, you'll see that it's about going from demand. Let me draw on this again, see if I can do that. Going from demand and making sure that we deliver value. And that how work gets done is a lot of times all over the place, and that's okay. And that's really what it's saying in the service value chain. The closest concept in project management is that of the service, what am I talking about? The process groups. So for those of you that have gone through PMP training, you probably remember the initiating process group, and then the planning process group, that of executing, that of monitoring and controlling, and then that of closing. Now, this also kind of got a bad rap because folks, again, saw this as sequential, and that's not how that happens in an organization. A lot of times we're going like this. But the key output, again, this is turning out to be a beautiful picture I've drawn here, is about value. Can we deliver? And especially those of you that have gone through Agile, or more specifically Scrum training, it's about how do we break up our work so that we're delivering a little bit of value at the end of every sprint, or at the end of every, let's say, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever that may be. That it's not just about working on tasks that will eventually bring value, but how do we bring value now? Yeah. So this table here, and I'll mention it again at the end because this is actually part of a much longer blog article that I wrote that's available on our website, and this is one of the images that are in it. And I think it just does a really nice job of showing at a high level how the two frameworks complement one another. So if we look over here on the left, the PMBOK guide, what a lot of project managers are probably familiar with, really is the focus of that is that of project management. How do we manage projects so that they're successful and so that they bring value to our customers? Whereas ITIL really talks about IT service management, meaning how do we serve our customers? How do we deliver and improve upon our products and services that we offer to our customers? How do we serve our customers better? PMI is the maker of the PMBOK guide. Axelos in the UK is the maker of the ITIL 4 framework. And within those frameworks, there's some interesting similarities. So in the current edition of the PMBOK guide, there are 49 processes. The 7th edition will be coming out early next year. Whereas in ITIL 4, there are 34 what's called practices. So similar. They used to be called processes, now they're called practices. And for the first time ever, one of those practices is project and program management, which we'll talk about here. I've got a whole slide talking through some of the highlights of that practice guide. It's interesting, in ITIL, in ITIL version 2, there were 11 processes that we had to learn, and it's kind of grown over time. So in version 3, there were 26. In ITIL 4, there's now 34. Same with the PMBOK guide, there's been new and shifted processes with each edition. As far as core books go, so the PMBOK guide is the most familiar that probably folks on this call, or the one that folks on this call are most familiar with, but it's really one of 7 core books that also have exams associated with them. So every few years, it seemed like a new guide or a new core book along with an exam came along, so you can get now certifications in business analysis, in program management, that's the PGMP, there's a portfolio management, and then there's also standards. So you can learn about earned value management specifically, or organizational project management, program management, portfolio management. There's a ton of books and standards under the PMI kind of umbrella. HOUSEKEEPIng also has lots of different guides outside of ITIL. There's books and certifications and courses and all that kind of stuff around Prince 2, which is project management. We'll talk about that here later in this session. There's risk management, there's program and portfolio management. So for those of you that are working in global organizations, they may be more familiar with some of the HOUSEKEEPIng standard certifications, that kind of thing. But if we're just talking about ITIL and ITIL 4, there are 6 core books that form that framework. So there's actually now a book, did not exist before, but there is a book for foundation that gives a foundational level of understanding. And then there are 5 advanced courses. So there's delivering stakeholder value, which really talks about how do we deliver products and services to customers that they're delighted with. So it talks a lot about like the customer journey and things like that. Create, deliver, and support is around how do we, on an ongoing basis, create, deliver, and support great products and services. High velocity IT is about how do we create products and services and do so at speed and yet have high quality in that. So it pulls a lot of concepts from Agile and Scrum and DevOps and Lean, and talks through all that kind of stuff. Toyota Kata, there's all sorts of interesting things in that book and associated class and exam. There's Direct, Plan, and Improve, which talks about how do we take a vision and turn it into reality? How do we plan it out? How do we implement it? How do we look at the data that we're given and improve upon that? And then Digital and IT Strategy, which is, of course, my favorite, is about how do we come up with that vision that's compelling, especially in the times that we are living. And in fact, fun fact, as we were writing the Digital and IT Strategy book, kind of towards the end is when the pandemic really started, and we had to go back and change, and actually I think made the book way better, change a couple of the chapters to include things like how do we move through these kinds of environments, and the acronym that we use in the book is that of BUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. How do we work through all of that? How do we respond to that? How do we come out of the other side of it? It has all sorts of interesting things like how do you foster innovation in an organization, et cetera, et cetera. I probably will do a whole nother session just on digital and IT strategy because it's super cool. And then as far as certifications go, the most popular one that PMI has is that of the PMP, Project Management Professional, and on the HOUSEKEEPIng side is that of ITIL 4 Foundation, and that's the prerequisite to all of the other courses and exams. Another new concept that is in ITIL 4 is that of the 4 dimensions of service management. And what that really does is it expands our mind beyond just thinking about processes. So processes are down over here. And I remember, because I've had lots of customers say this to me throughout the years, is they say, okay, we're going to implement ITIL and we're going to have a great process for how we manage incidents. So when things break, we're going to get customers back up and running. We're going to have a really good process for how we manage change and make sure that we have a good balance between being able to make changes and yet protect ourselves when we're making those changes. And then maybe we'll have a really good process for how we manage our assets and do something called configuration management. And then customers would go, cool, we're doing ITIL, we're awesome. And then you go and you talk to their customers and they're like, not awesome. They are not doing so awesome. And it's because we've shifted our focus to processes and not to the end goal. creating products and services that bring value to our customers. And so what this really does is it says, think about all the other dimensions that matter. If we just take one, what used to be called process, if we just take incident management, when things break and customers can't do the work that they need to do, it's not just about having, here's the steps that we go through to get our customer back and running. It could be, culturally, we need to look at the culture. How is our organization set up? Do we have, too much bureaucracy in place? How are teams and the roles and responsibilities? Is that working well? Because that can hinder us, that can also help us. So there's a whole human element. Actually, this whole side over here on the left is the human element, the people side of it. We have to think about our partners and our suppliers and how all of that is working. On the right-hand side, we have to look at our tools. Is that helping us or hindering us? Are we doing a lot of manual work that's bogging us down? Especially now that we're all like scattered to the wind, it's showing us a lot of those little messes when it came to processes and technology, because it used to be where you could just ask somebody down the hall, and now you can't. And so we have to look at the technology side of it and the automation side of it and the flow of knowledge and how that's happening. That's super important with now this remote workforce that we have. And then one of the key components, but not the main component, is that of understanding our value streams. That actually comes out of Lean and is a whole nother interesting topic we could spend a whole webinar on. And I do have a blog article that I can direct you to that talks about value streams. That is so cool, just value stream mapping and what that looks like. And really mapping out our system and how our products and services are delivered. And getting rid of waste. And anyway, I will stop myself. But yeah, value streams and processes, again, just one of the 4 dimensions of serving our customers. And to this human element, this is what I was talking about with the guiding principles. There's 7 of them here. I'll just touch on them really briefly, but focusing on value is really focusing on our customer, their perspective, how we get stuff into the hands of our customers. And this kind of ties to that is, how do we break up our work into more manageable chunks or manageable sections so that we can get feedback, we can make decisions on data, starting where we are, looking at what we can use, what needs to go, collaborating across teams, promoting visibility across teams. This really speaks to the 4 dimensions down here, is about looking at that wider picture and thinking and working holistically, keeping it really simple and practical. And delivering things like, if you're familiar and have taken any sort of Agile training, this minimally viable product, and then looking for ways that we can simplify, we can optimize, and where we can be smart about automation. All right, so we're going to do the world's fastest review of all 34 of the practices in ITIL 4. I will dig into a few of them and just mention a couple of things that as project managers have some overlap or have some importance to know. And they're broken up into 3, think of them like 3 buckets, essentially. There's general management practices, there's what's called service management practices, and then there's technical management practices. So under the general management practices, these are all practices that have come from lots of different places in organizations globally, not just from what has been in the ITIL framework since the beginning. A lot of these are new. So things like architecture management, how we think of the entire architecture of our whole system and what that looks like. This is a very strategic kind of practice. Continual improvement, that's one that has been part of the ITIL framework for a long time, has been expanded upon here in ITIL 4. Security management has some really good ideas on security in general. Doesn't try to be the de facto standard, but has some really good knowledge around security and the things to be thinking about as we're delivering products and services. Knowledge management, big tie-in with what we do as project managers, and it talks about not only how are we managing knowledge within our team, within our project team, but how is that knowledge being shared across the organization, and how are we getting information into the hands of people when they need it. There's a whole practice around measurement and reporting and how to do all of that. There's a really interesting one. This one is also brand new around organizational change management. So not so much on like if we make a change, understanding how that impacts other folks. That is now called change enablement. But this one is more on how do we change the people in our organization? How do we get change to stick in our organization over the long term? So we're not just saying, oh, here, bright, shiny object, let's do this, and then we lose interest. And oh, bright, shiny object over here, and then lose interest. It's how do we make a fundamental shift or transform our organization and have that be successful. Portfolio management. This one has been, I believe this has been, part of ITIL previously, but has some tie-ins with what we as project managers understand to be portfolio management. Project management has some really good information in there. Relationship management. So this one kind of has a tie-in with stakeholder management, if you're familiar with that knowledge area. It used to be called business relationship management, but it's been expanded to include relationships with all sorts of different stakeholders, customers, suppliers, partners, teams, you name it. Risk management is in there, also has some tie-ins with what we understand as risk management. Service financial management. So this also kind of has some tie-ins with cost management in the PMBOK. Strategy management is here, supplier management, and this one is also really cool. This is brand new around workforce and talent management. So how do we hire the right people, develop and mentor and coach people, because at the end of the day, it's people that are delivering products and services. It's people that are using our products and services. So how do we make sure that internally we've got the right people on the bus? They understand what they're doing. They're getting, more skilled and staying engaged over time. So some really cool stuff in the general management practices. And let's talk about project management, that practice specifically. So if you go to the ITIL'S site, that you will see that if you click on, I think it's called My ITIL'S, and specifically My ITIL, you'll see that all 34 of the practices are there. If you take and pass the ITIL Foundation class, take the exam and pass the exam, you actually get free access to this site for a year. After that, it's like $50 a year, but you get electronic access to all of the practices as well as other really good white papers and case studies and all sorts of stuff. And then you can actually click on the project management practice guide. The cover looks like this. And then I just wanted to highlight a couple of interesting concepts in the practice guide document. It's about like 30-ish pages in length. It talks about not only projects, but programs. And what are the key activities that we're doing in programs? How are those different than projects? It also does a nice job of showing what's the difference between a more traditional or waterfall type of delivery of whether it be products or services versus a more agile delivery. Prince2 quite a bit. So Prince2 just stands for projects in controlled environments, and it's unlike PMI's PMBOK guide. The PMBOK guide is a framework, meaning here's all the stuff you can do, pick and choose what works for you, tailor it to your organization. Prince2, however, is a method, meaning here are the elements. If you're going to say you're doing a Prince2 project, here are the basic elements that you should do so that you can compare apples to apples and you're working consistently. And that I think that is a really nice complement to the PMBOK guide, because I find that organizations that are solely looking at the PMBOK guide allow project managers to kind of come up with, and you'll see this a lot when you go and talk with project managers, how do you run a project? You get 1,000 different answers, versus if you're working with an organization that follows Prince2, the basics are done consistently. Same as with, I see a lot of times with Scrum. If teams are saying that they're doing Scrum, they do the basics. They have sprints, they do sprint planning, they do sprint reviews, they do retrospectives, or we hope that we're doing all those things so that there's a consistency. Same idea. And again, if you're working in global projects, Prince2 is a really good understanding to have, because a lot of times project managers, project teams are used to that terminology, and it just helps us kind of speak the same language. All right, service management practices. I'm going to go through these quickly. These have been part of the ITIL framework for quite some time. The stuff that's in bold, I forgot to mention this in the general management practices, but the stuff that's in bold, we actually cover as part of a foundations class. The stuff that's underlined, we actually do a deeper dive into those practices. So like change enablement, we talk through what that should look like. We talk about lots of ideas around how do you find that balance between being able to make changes and do them very quickly, and particularly in an Agile or a DevOps environment, but also protect ourselves as an organization so we aren't making these changes and taking really important stuff down. And then, yeah, we do deep dives into incident management, problem management, the service desk, service level management, and service request management. And then last but not least, technical management practices. There are a few here as well. So how we do deployment, that's actually been separated from release management, because a lot of teams are especially ones that, again, are in Agile or DevOps environments, development is done sometimes at a different cadence, and those are done differently than release management. There's also, these other two are also new: infrastructure and platform management, software development, and management. Okay, and then this is the certification path. So like I said before, everybody starts here, and then once you have that, you now have the prerequisite to be able to take all of the other classes. Now, you can take one, you can take many. If you complete these 4 classes, you become what's called managing professional. You get that designation. This is the same class here. So let's say you took these 4 classes on the left and became managing professional. If you then took this one additional class called Digital and IT Strategy, the best of all the classes, you then also become strategic leader. So if you get these 2 on the right, you become a ITIL strategic leader. If you take these 4 on the left, you become what's called a managing professional. These are the covers of the 5 books, and because TSO, the stationary office out of the UK, is so awesome, only for friends of Beyond20 do you get 20% off of all of the practice guides. There's also bundles, so if you buy like the 2 books for strategic leader, you get you can bundle that up. If you use the code EF20, you get 20% off until the end of the year, which is super awesome. Nobody gets that discount. So it's a super secret discount. I highly encourage you, if you're interested in the books, to purchase them. You can get them electronically, you can get them hard copy. I personally like hard copy because I like to write all over my books, but that's just me and I'm a weirdo. I write in all my books. You can tell if I've read a book because there's just stuff written all over it and highlighted and stuff like that. There's also subscriptions. So if you just want to like read some of the materials electronically, but you don't want to like buy the whole thing, you can do that as well. And then just a couple last thoughts I want to leave folks with, and then we'll open up and leave lots of time for questions today, is to check out the blog article I was telling you about. If you just go to Beyond20 and you click on at the top where it says blog, our digital transformation blog will come up. We have articles on really, really good articles. I would be remiss if I didn't say that, because our authors are phenomenal about a variety of different topics. So DevOps and Agile and Scrum and Prince2, and I mean, you name it, organizational change, anything that impacts digital transformation. We've got tons and tons of articles there, free templates, free downloads, one of which is this really cool little 1-page download around what's new in ITIL 4. So if you're already familiar with version 3, this is just like a quick 1-pager that shows you what's new and how it's different. If you want a deeper dive and specifically around the topics that we talked about today, I would recommend finding the blog article that is the same title as this webinar, A Project Manager's Guide to ITIL 4. And then another thing I would recommend is take a class. If you are not familiar with ITIL 4, if you haven't taken any ITIL 4 training, and even if you have taken ITIL 3 training, there's so much stuff that's new in ITIL 4. It's really worth taking a 2-day class. We run virtual classes about once every 2 to 3 weeks. And just like our authors are our instructors. All of our instructors are also working consultants, and they are such phenomenal trainers. And we really try to mimic, now that we're all virtual and things like that, we really try to mimic an in-class experience. So we have virtual whiteboards, and we move sticky notes all over the walls, and we put pictures and images, and we do a lot of drawing, and they're really a lot of fun. So if you haven't taken a Beyond20 class, and if you haven't taken an ITIL 4 class, I recommend that you do so. We are a market leader for ITIL, IT service management, actually Agile, as well as cybersecurity training. You will not be disappointed. So that's all I've got. Chad, any questions from folks?
Yeah, we have a ton of questions and they're still pouring in. We can start with this question from Shri. The question is, as ITIL 4 is still relatively new, could you provide some guidance on how, as a PM, I can implement or adopt ITIL 4 in my organization or migrate from ITIL 2011 to ITIL 4?
Yeah, so I would say, regardless of what it is that you're trying to do in your organization, I don't care if it's ITIL 4, if it's Agile, if it's DevOps, start with the end in mind. What problem are we trying to solve? What goal are we trying to achieve? If you can figure that out, and if you can define that really, really well, the rest of it becomes easier. The not so effective approach is to say, oh, there's 34 practices now, let's implement several of them or all of them. Start with the why first. What problem are we trying to solve? What are we trying to improve in our organization? And then look at the ITIL books. I mean, they're essentially a framework. So it says, here's all the tools that can be helpful to you, and figure out the right tool that's going to help you fix whatever it is that you're trying to do or achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. So it really goes back to the guiding principles. You know, you want to focus on value, start where you are, et cetera, et cetera. For different organizations, that's going to be different. It's a much longer conversation. I'm happy to do that. There's also actually a blog article that's something like, where do I start with ITIL, or how do I start to implement this stuff? I don't exactly remember what it's called, but I'm happy to send that your way.
Cool. And then we have another question here from Vernon. Leadership often asks for project plans. I understand how a project plan aligns with waterfall, but what does a project plan look like for more agile approaches?
Yeah, so the information that you give to leadership is going to be different, but they're going to have data much more often. So I would say that what they will get are things like, or what they'll be able to view would be things like burn down charts, so they can see the progress of the team in that particular sprint and how that particular sprint is going. But the big advantage that they get is they get to see something in these sprint reviews. They actually get to see potentially shippable product and give their feedback. Now, will you have a high level plan? Maybe, but it's going to be very lightweight. It's not going to be and I remember I used to create project management plans that would be many, many pages, and nobody ever looked at them. And I used to create really cool looking project schedules that were a fictitious representation of reality. But there are schedules that you can show that show sprint over sprint. It's going to be different. It's going to be different information than they're getting now. So we have to educate. We have to educate our executives that they're going to see data and they're going to see it differently. But the most important thing is they're going to get to see actual stuff, and much more quickly. You know, in a traditional project, you know, I've worked on projects that were multiple years in length, and you'd update, you know, we're 50% complete or we're 75% complete, but you don't actually show something. until the very end. So you kind of take the requirements, you go disappear, and then by the time you reappear with something to show your stakeholders, their needs have already long changed long ago. And so what this helps you do is get that feedback, which is so important to see if you're even on the right track, and then course correct. So again, this is a whole nother webinar. Happy to direct you to some resources. We also have a 2-day Agile Scrum Fundamentals course. We have a 2-day Certified Scrum Master and Certified Product Owner course that are outstanding, that really teach you all the concepts within Agile, what it means to do Agile versus be Agile, how to have the right mindset, and then how to do work associated with Scrum and what that looks like, and building a Scrum team, and all the stuff that you would do. So yeah.
Very cool. And we have a question here from Mitchell. Mitchell says, I am interested in guidance or templates on integrating ITSM into the project lifecycle.
ITSM into the project lifecycle. That's an interesting question. So I do actually have a different webinar called A Project Manager's Guide to ITIL version 3. And there's a diagram in there that shows some of the things that you have to be thinking about throughout a project. So for example, in an ITIL environment, when you kick off a project, what operations is going to care about and what your customers are going to care about are these things called SLAs, service level agreements. So that's documentation that needs to be considered as you're running a project. The metrics on how you measure that service you need to think about, and a lot of these things are things that carry on after the project is done, but have to be thoughtfully created and discussed with customers throughout. But I encourage you to look at that webinar, and there's like a purple diagram that shows like the different phases, or not the different phases, but the different process groups within a project, and kind of overlays that with the ITIL framework. Great questions. Everyone's got great questions. You're making my brain work.
Yeah, and we have another question from Anas, I believe. Who will be responsible for the ITIL artifacts and project artifacts? Is it the PMO, or should the two offices be integrated with each other, or how might that look?
Ooh, that's a great question. So the answer you'll probably get from me is going to be, it depends. If you have a project management office, I know a lot of times organizations might also have something called a service management office. If you have a service management office, they might be the ones to have a lot of these kind of IT service management templates and be kind of that center of excellence. Those two teams should definitely be talking to one another, because it will be of benefit to one another. And the reason why I say that is because if you think about the view of a project manager, it's from start of the project, you kick it off, to the end of the project, you hand it over to, let's say, operations, and then you're like, yay, and you celebrate and all that good stuff. If you think about that product or service beyond the end of the project, somebody has to maintain that, improve it, all that kind of stuff. You may make different decisions that benefit the project in a short-term fashion, but may not benefit the product or service over the long term. So you may say, you may make let's say a hardware or software related decision that makes sense for the project, doesn't make sense ultimately for the life of that product. So having that more long-term thinking and involving people that are going to be involved in the life of that product or service during that project is going to benefit everyone immensely.
Very cool. And there was a follow-up question there. Does ITIL mention anything regarding organizational change management in the new version?
Yes, absolutely. So there's a whole practice around organizational change management. And in fact, that actually changed the name of what's now called change enablement. Used to be called change management. For those of you that learned about change management in ITIL version 3, there was always confusion between change management as we think of it in IT And then there's change management when we think about like organizational change, like how do we get our organization to shift and transform? And so to avoid that confusion, that process was renamed as the change enablement practice. So when we say change enablement, that means if you're making a change, you want to look at what's the impact to the wider organization, versus organizational change management looks at the entire system. And then that's different than project change management, because we're looking at, okay, if I make this change within the project, how's that going to impact scope, schedule, all that kind of stuff, versus change enablement is the whole organization.
All right, and a few more questions here. If you have ITIL 3, can you still upgrade to 4, or do you have to retake ITIL 4 Foundation?
Yeah, so there's not a bridge class from version 3 to 4 at that foundational level, because so much of it's new. And in fact, day 1 is brand new for everyone in version 3. It's all the concepts we talked about as part of this webinar. It's service value system, service value chain, guiding principles, 4 dimensions, et cetera, et cetera. So day 1, totally new. Day 2, there's a lot of things that have changed in the processes. So that's what we cover. Well, what we used to know as processes, now we call practices. All that, a lot of that stuff has changed. So new practices have come about, existing practices have changed or been expanded upon. So for example, like change enablement, that one has changed quite a bit since version 3, and talks about all the different kinds of changes and things we have to consider. And it really, I think, includes a lot of cool stuff around like, how do you do this in a DevOps environment? How do you do this when, you know, when we're talking about software changes? And it gives examples and different kinds of ways that you can look at changes, you know, peer reviews and automated testing and all sorts of cool stuff. So if you've taken version 3, I think 2 days in an ITIL 4 foundation class is a really good use of time, because it will brush you up on, it'll be a good reminder of the stuff maybe that you learned in version 3, but it'll really like solidify your knowledge in ITIL 4.
Very cool. And then,
And
oh, sorry.
oh, and real quick, no worries, I'm just on a roll, Chad. For those of you that are PMP certified, you get 16 PDUs for ITIL Foundation. You also get 24 PDUs for the advanced classes, and there are a lot of the PDUs are leadership and strategic, not so much on the technical side, which tend to be, at least for me, the harder ones to get. So they're really good classes if you need PDUs.
All right, and then we have a question from Yasir. As someone who is looking forward to being an ITIL consultant, do I need to be fluent in any particular ITSM platforms?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so Gartner does actually, in fact, I think it's like a week ago, they just released their annual review of IT service management platforms, and it's a super good read. So they go through, I mean, there's like 400 tool vendors that say that they are ITIL compliant, but they take, Gartner takes like the top, I think it's like 10 or so, and kind of contrast and compare them. And it's a good read to see like, what are the pros of each of these platforms, what are the cons. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's, you know, Chad, you mentioned this earlier at the very beginning, where you're saying what we focus on at Beyond20 is people, process, and technology and tools and things like that. And I think it has to be in that order. You have to look at your people, you have to fix, you know, what's going on there. You have to look at your processes, your practices, how stuff is working, and then look at technology. But where I see organizations mess this up or not get the value that they had hoped is they go, we have these problems, let's buy a tool and let's just click next, 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 finish, and then magically we're doing ITIL and everything's perfect and our customers are happy. And the ones that I see do a much better job are the ones that say, let's look at our people, let's look at our processes. Once we have our processes well defined, then let's figure out how we automate them with tools. So personally, yeah, I think it's good to have some working knowledge of the leading IT service management tools, but it's not the only thing. And I'll make another plug for the DITS class, because we've now run a couple of the public classes and they are so awesome. The digital and IT strategy class, it's 3 days in length. But it's a little bit different than the other intermediate classes or the other advanced classes, because you don't just take a class and take an exam at the end like you do with the others. In the digital and IT strategy class, it's really meant for leaders, senior consultants, managers, directors, CIOs, even CEOs, because what you do is you actually have a case study with 3 different companies, and then the class breaks up into 3 different teams. So each team takes a different company, and you have 4 assignments throughout the class where you actually take the concepts you learn in class and you work on them for about an hour each one. You come up with a presentation and you show the class essentially how you come up with a digital strategy, or what your strategy would be, or how you would function in a VUCA environment. And it really strengthens your consultative skills, your communication skills, and frankly, your knowledge. So, you know, if you're interested in consulting, whether you're an internal consultant for your own organization or you're a leader in your own organization, like, that class is amazing. And those in-class assignments are students' most favorite thing of the whole thing.
All right, and we have time for one more question here, and it's regarding how much demand is there on the market currently and in the future for ITIL-related positions?
Ooh, good question. When you look at any global organization, I would say 95 to 100% of global organizations are using some element of this. This is something that I'm glad you asked this question, because I talked about it in the blog, I believe, but I didn't mention it here, is that there are more than 1 million people that are certified in PMP. There are well more than 1 million people that are certified in ITIL. And we have tons of students that come to our classes that say, having the certification used to be a nice to have. I'm looking at the job description and it's now saying it's a must have. So if you work in technology, if you work in IT operations, if you serve customers of any kind and you are a technology enabled organization, it's something that I think is really, really valuable to have.
Very cool. I think that just about does it.
Cool. And right on time. I love it.
Yeah, look at that. All right, so everyone, you will be receiving an email with a recording of this webinar, as well as the resources that were mentioned throughout. If you have any questions or concerns or would like to get started with anything mentioned here, don't hesitate to be in touch. We're always happy to help. All right, you've done a great job. Thank you, Erica, and thank you everyone for joining us. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.